guys, it's Jess and welcome back to my channel. Welcome to my channel if it is your first time here. Just a short one from me today because I am here to film my September wrap up, and having hit a little bit of a reading slump this month, I only read 3.5 books, so let's get into it. The first book that I read is one that I have talked about in a number of my recent videos, and that is To All the Boys I Loved Before by Jenny Han. I was inspired to read this following the release of the Netflix movie. Again, something which I've mentioned in a number of my recent videos is that I broke a golden rule and watched the movie before I read the book, but I was just in the mood for something fluffy and light and I needed it in my life. And honestly, I think watching the movie enhanced my reading of this book because it's quite a quick and sparse read, and the movie really fleshes out the story that Jenny Han tells. So for me, watching the movie and then reading the book, they were actually really good companions of one another. So if you are not familiar with the plot of this story, it's about a young teenage girl in America who has written a love letter to every boy that she has loved before, and she keeps hold of these letters and she seals them, she addresses them, but she doesn't send them. And then one day, somehow, all the letters get sent out, and Lara Jean, who is our protagonist, has to deal with the fallout of that. And this is just a gorgeous, easy to read, cozy, fluffy novel that just ticked all the boxes for me. It was exactly what I needed to read when I needed to read it. It doesn't have a whole lot of substance to it, so don't go in thinking that it's going to be a really impactful story because you probably will be disappointed. But for me, as I've said, it was just so gorgeous and it was exactly what I needed. And the main thing that stood out really for me was that there was no angst. This is probably one of the first YA contemporary romance books that I've read where there is no angst. It's just straight down the line, and I just loved it. And I've ordered the second and the third one because I just need some more Lara Jean in my life. The next book I read was Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng, and honestly, I gave this book 3 stars. I was not as impressed as I had expected to be. I think this book, or Celeste Ng's books in general, have a lot of hype, and so I had high expectations for this, and it just fell a little bit short of the mark for me. So this is set in the 1970s and we follow a Chinese American family, and right at the beginning of the book we discover that the teenage daughter in this family, Lydia, has died, and the police believe that she committed suicide. And we sort of flick back and forth between different timelines, discovering the kinds of secrets that this family might be covering up. And I thought that this was a heartbreaking and poignant read, particularly from the perspective as a mother. First of all, the thought of losing a child is just horrendous no matter who you are. It just doesn't even bear imagining. But also the way that Celeste Ng looked at how parents can place pressure onto their children and expectations onto their children based on their own shortcomings and their own experiences of childhood. So in this particular book we have James, who is a Chinese man, and his parents were immigrants, and so his whole childhood he's grown up a little bit ashamed of his parents and a little bit ashamed of who he is, and he carries that with him into adulthood, and he sees slights against his culture and his heritage where there isn't any, because he's so hypersensitive to it, because he has experienced prejudice and he has experienced racism, and he then places these high expectations on his children because he so desperately wants them to fit in, and he so desperately doesn't want them to have the same experiences that he had. And then we have Marilyn, who is his wife. Obviously, again, then a Chinese man marrying a white woman was a big deal in the 1970s, so they felt pressure for that. And then Marilyn wanted to kind of break away from her homemaker mother and be a surgeon, and so she places all these expectations on Lydia because Marilyn's dream doesn't ever come to pass, and so she wants it for her daughter. And so on the one hand it's quite innocuous with parents just wanting what they didn't have for their children, but at some point it crosses a line into a pressure that is just too much for them to bear. And so I appreciated the way that Celeste Ng explored that, but for me I just could not get past how obnoxious Marilyn and James were how selfish and how completely unaware of anybody else except for themselves, and I just don't think that parents would be that unobservant about their kids. And there are 3 children in the family, and the youngest, Hannah, I was so angry for her at so many points in the story because she's just completely forgotten about, and then at the very end they remember that she exists, and I just couldn't mirror it all up. It just was very frustrating for me, and so I couldn't quite see past that frustration to appreciate perhaps exactly what Celeste Ng had tried to do. So it landed at 3 stars for me. I thought it was good but not amazing. Next up, I read The Cuckoo's Calling by Robert Galbraith, aka J.K. Rowling, and this is a mystery about a down-on-his-luck veteran private detective, Cormoran Strike, and Cormoran is asked by a wealthy lawyer to investigate the apparent suicide of this lawyer's adopted sister. This sister also happens to be a socialite and model, and so Cormoran Strike is thrust into the world of the rich and the famous and the dark secrets which come alongside that. I really enjoyed this book. I thought that it was easy to read. I really enjoyed J.K. Rowling's writing style. I thought that it flowed quite well. I do feel like it was a little bit repetitive in places and a little bit slow with the pacing at times. We were given the same information more times than I felt was necessary in some parts, but overall I didn't guess the ending. I enjoyed the writing style. I thought it was really easy to get into, and I'm looking forward to picking up the next one. I particularly actually enjoyed the character of Robin, who is Strike's temporary secretary, and I just really enjoyed the way that she was portrayed. I thought she was fantastic. I hope that she appears more in the future books, and overall a solid read for me. And then the final book that I read, I'm only halfway through, that is the Bookish Mama's pick for September. We were doing classics, so we chose The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte. So this follows the story of the tenant of Wildfell Hall. She is basically a mysterious woman who moves into this ramshackle manor house with her son, and based on the time that this book is written, you can obviously imagine the salacious rumours which soon begin that she maybe doesn't conduct herself in a way that is proper. And the book is told in the form of letters written from Gilbert Markham, who is a man who lives in the village, to somebody that we don't yet know who that is. As I said, I'm only halfway through, and I've actually found it easier to read than I had expected. I'm not hugely familiar with classics, but the few that I have read just take so much brain power to read, and I think that might be a little bit why I've ground to a halt with my reading this month, because it's obviously more difficult to read a book like this than, say, To All the Boys I've Loved Before. There's just so much to wade through. But having said all of that, I'm really enjoying it. I think it's interesting how a lot of the things that Anne Bronte talks about in this book, about the issues that women face, is still very relevant today, and I feel like that's only going to get more so as I go into the book. And I'm interested to do a little bit more background research into how groundbreaking this book was when it was released, because I feel like the answer is probably very. Helen Graham, who is our single woman living at Wildfell Hall, is trying to make her living as an artist. She's trying to survive as a single woman in this society, and yeah, I just feel like it's a really interesting narrative and a really interesting look at the value that society places on women and the judgment that society places on women. And I feel like as I get more into the book, that is only going to become more and more prominent. But I will save my full thoughts for my October wrap-up, when I will hopefully have finished this. So there you go, they are the very few books that I read during the month of September. Do let me know anything that you read and particularly enjoyed. Let me know what you're reading now. I always love to know. As always, thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to give me the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I will see you all soon.